Jim Hall, how lovely to see you. I'm really excited that we've been able to get together. Finally. How are you?
Hi, Anne. Yes, as I said before we started recording officially, I have dressed for the occasion. I'm taking it very seriously. Yeah, as of today, because I don't know about everyone else, but like it's minute by minute sometimes. As of today, I have poems in front of me. I have kind of you to talk to about writing. And yeah, it's kind of like a chilled breeze coming through the window in a nice way. So, there's a few good conditions there for conversation. Things are mostly good, thank you.
Excellent. I've also got a dog barking in the background. That's like life is happening around us, Jim. It's all still happening.
Yeah.
Well, so, it's interesting you say you've got some poems with you. New ones, you said, because
yes.
I had to check, but you were the first published poetry book for Big White Shed. I'm not sure, you were sort of neck and neck with Chris McLaughlin for, us talking about it, but this bad boy, I was going to say, is the first poetry book that we ever put out on Big White Shed, and it's called Boy, and it's not Bad Boy. So I'm hoping we can have a little bit of a chat about that, because did you say it was 2016 when that came out?
Yeah, I'm confident, because I think what happened was it was an interesting period, because if you remember 2015, the year before, the summer of that year, I put out like a self-produced small pamphlet, Upon Arrival Drop Your Call, and I think the momentum of that carried me into Boy like a year later. So within those 2 years, quite a lot happened, but it was definitely 2016, and I remember it being like the hottest day of the year, June, when I actually launched the thing. So yeah, quite a stretch of years back now, frighteningly.
So what was the final push to make you bring out Upon Arrival? Because that's quite an undertaking to do it for yourself.
Yeah, I think I've always been someone that has enjoyed, like, I'm very appreciative of poems being found everywhere. So like, online, in zines, how audio, spoken, however you want to take them in. But there's something for me I've always enjoyed about the physical action of having something in a place. And I think also I realized, and I'm only realizing now as I'm working on the newer poems, because as you know, Anne, like quite a lot happens in my head, like of all kinds and styles, and my writing is kind of very everywhere, and having it at least in some contained space like was a really important start point for me in looking at my process, because I think until that pamphlet was at a point where I was like, yes, I'm going to do this. And you have to know, which I'm sure you do, when I did that, and it's not a non-ego thing, but when I wanted to put it out, it wasn't expecting it to be like picked up by anyone necessarily, or like, I'm interested to sell this many. I just really enjoyed the idea of a small kind of little city almost of poems in one place. And by doing that, I really felt like in that moment, it made me take my process really differently in terms of acknowledging and letting everything come in. But having some kind of rough end goal is just really important to me, I think, as a writer.
It's interesting because at the moment, we, Big White Shed, have got quite a few people. We're working on putting out small collections, pamphlets, whatever you want to call them. And it's like, I think it's really important to give a little bit of space to those poems from that moment in time, that period, that you don't know when it starts and you don't know when it ends, but these need to be put somewhere. So I had forgotten actually in doing those about you doing that. So what then made you go, do you know what? I'm gonna do another book. I'm gonna do a book.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because of course, everyone's got their own definitions, but Boy in itself was actually, I mean, this is not to underestimate the effort and the energy that was put into it. It's 20 poems still. It's not like this kind of, typical 45 poem collection or whatever, but it still felt like quite a big chunk of something. And obviously the key thing was probably the theme of it, that, the title was always a kind of anchor to the fact that every individual title and piece in the book is centered on the idea of boy. And as you know, not singular a boy, not like my just experience, but I guess the many boys that were kind of, and it's very heavily gendered in an interesting way, which is much less so, which we'll talk about in my new work. That was very focused on the idea of, boy and its limitations, its restrictions, its possibilities. And I have to be honest, Dan, you know, again, you were quite instrumental in that. The key question of, you know, what pushed me to think now is the moment. You know, I remember sharing some work with you, and I remember you talking about Big White Shed and kind of what your hopes were for it. And I remember you just put out your own initial publication with them, and sort of like just felt really excited by it. I think, you know, you mentioned it and it's so crucial. You said this thing about the nowness, the kind of putting something out either smaller or that's of the moment, you know, in a way. It's still been edited and looked at, but it's capturing a certain kind of essence or feeling. And this new work, again, is completely about that. I'm really leaning into how can you kind of write something that is not stressed about legacy and like, will someone read this in 100 years, will this reach someone in the middle of wherever, but just like what captures something of now, like being alive in say 2021. And because as soon as you start writing a piece, the minutes are passing and times are changing all the time. And I think putting Boy out was just about honoring what I felt, the feeling of how it was to put the pamphlet out on I guess a larger scale.
Cool, lovely. I mean, it's interesting because I think you were instrumental in Big White Shed, those early few books. The fact that key people were trusting me with their heart, really, in a little book, in a big book, a little book. You know what I mean by a little book. That was instrumental in me going, yes, let's crack on with this. And the rest, Jim, it's history. Here we are. There's like 30 titles later, and it's those people who entrusted me with their work at the start that were really amazing. You say, did you want to talk a little bit about some of the content of Boy, or do you want to? I know you mentioned you've got some new poems. Do you want to share some of that, or you tell me how you'd like to do it?
Should we have a poem to kick off? Should we just drop it straight away? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Sudden, so true snuffle of hedgehog in a smoking area, and nothing else matters now. Not Jake Paul, not someone calling the jam to butter ratio of their scone a knife crime. All ghosts ghost off. That it was hard to care about Brexit when someone you loved wanted to leave the earth. That a fox nuzzles the cruel tire of the car that tomorrow will crush its skull. I'm sorry. Sometimes the weather is so perfect.
Oh, Jim, straight to the heart there.
Newsreader. Next headline.
Straight to the heart. Yeah, to worry about Brexit when someone you love wants to leave the earth. Thank you. Your poetry is personal. I was going to say it feels very personal, but everything you write is very personal, isn't it?
Can we talk about this? Because this is what's really interesting to me, and the whole, the new collection, it's like throughout the whole thing, I consciously don't reference this like speaker, you know, the kind of I did this, I did that. But what you said is so interesting, because I've been learning so much that even if you don't always have to write exactly how you feel about a situation, but if you're approaching it like trying to describe it or capture it, you know, you almost are like still connecting to your own personal experience, right? So like you say, that poem is an example where actually it's about many things, but you're completely right. Like there's no question that line, for example, yeah, okay, it doesn't have to be explicit, but it's based off of something I experienced. But there's never an intention, particularly in this collection. I'm really conscious of it. I'm not trying to write a book that is, here is Jim, you know, it's not that intention. But isn't it kind of interesting with writing that just by what you observe and what you think matters enough to kind of put onto a page, you kind of are doing that in a way? I think your perspective is always your perspective, no matter how much you kind of try and almost run away from it or move into new territory. But there's no conscious kind of, I feel this in the book at all. It's just, as you say, but it's so interesting how you said it kind of felt personal.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And yet I wasn't thinking, oh, Jim, were you that hedgehog? Were you in that smoking area?
I'd love to be a hedgehog, though. That's a good question.
It's just, it felt like you were really letting me hear the secrets, the thoughts that are in your head. And that is something that I note from all of the poems I've read of yours. And Boy, yeah, boy was special for me because you said something interesting about how it was very gendered. And I guess since then we've all been unpicking gender quite a lot.
Yes.
It was very pertinent to me because of the way that you were unpicking boy and what boy is in a very delicate, careful way. So yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's like I love the fact that we're allowed to look inside your head or your heart or your gut, whatever it is you're sharing with us. So what's different then with the new book?
I think I mean, it sounds a bit generic to say everything, but it feels like everything is. I mean, it's so interesting, and again, a lot of this was not conscious, not me sitting down. You know me, I'm not the kind of writer, and there are many that do, that sits down and like, boy was like this. There's title here, there's a theme here. Obviously, there's other things that are going to overlap and jump in and out of the page, but the key is this gender, this kind of thing. Weirdly, this one is completely different in that again, it's become an unconscious thing that's just happening, but I actually don't reference a single element of gender in this whole book. Like, no one's defined as male, female. It's very like someone, like, again, not kind of sitting down thinking I'm going to write a book that doesn't reference this word, but there's something about, there's more possibility, I think, to my process now. I think that boy was not limited, is maybe an unfair word, but it was always hemmed in on this idea of unpacking what I felt at the time to be the limitations and, like I keep repeating, possibilities of identifying as male, as boy, dependent on your experience. But this is so much more, it feels like I've cracked that whole thing open, and I'm a bit more open to just more the experience and observation of things, regardless of gender, regardless of a certain preconception you might have. So it's so fascinating to me that this new piece of work is so different to boy. I mean, if you put them parallel, I feel there's going to be so many differences, and yet probably, as you would pick up, still a lot of core similarities. The kind of whole thing of the book is, so it's called Elsewhere, and it took me like 5 years, as you know, to kind of try different things with this and figure out. It's gone through 7 different titles. It's gone through starting out as a single poem, starting out as almost a prose essay like book, and it's now very much set on Elsewhere, because a lot of the poems jump from place to place, either practically and physically and setting wise, or also emotionally, and sort of different voices come in and out. There's loads of referencing of the word in the book, so elsewhere, and then boom, something is happening, because that's just how I think I've realized I am in the world. I'm someone who can literally be like in the most joyful place blasting a bit of Carly Rae Jepsen in my living room, but then at the same moment I'm so conscious that, like, round the corner there may be someone barely able to fill their fridge. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's so much happening at all times. There's a key line in the book that's anchoring it, is everything is so everything. You can feel very strongly about one thing as much as you can the other, and I'm just trying to make room for it all to come in. Yeah.
So, question, with boy, and possibly upon arrival drop your call, was that we sort of throw the term collection out. I know when I put together my collection, I literally collected together everything I had, squidged it together and kicked out the ones that jarred a bit with the others. Is that how boy happened?
Actually, no. Boy was actually so different to now. Boy was, here's the title, here's the loose idea, every title will feature the word boy. That's all I had to start with. And it was a poem by poem, step by step process. So it was like one poem done, next poem done. As you know, obviously some poems were done and then were sort of discarded or were half finished. So many mini failures, part of the journey. I mean, every poem sometimes feels like a mini failure, but in a positive way. So it was very much, here's a poem, it's done. And I had lots of strange limitations that I don't have now. Like, I knew I wanted it to be 20 poems. I knew I wanted, like, say, one poem to be focused on the idea of a scene of being on a bus, one to be focused on a relationship between boy and father, which clearly is me and dad, how it is. So there were these kind of limitations, or again, form rules I'd set for myself, and I was just chipping away, one to one to one, until I had 20 I was happy with. And I remember, I don't know if I told you this, but when we were doing the kind of deadlines for the sessions of, you know, send your first draft, do your edits, the last poem in the book was written like a kind of couple of days before I sent the final thing off. So it was really up to that point of finale, yeah.
And with Elsewhere, is that you're doing that again? I mean, you say it's taken 5 years. Have you been working on that for 5 years? Or is it you've been living for 5 years, during which time that's been occurring?
That's nicely done. I'd go with the latter. I've not been okay, so technically from the moment Boy finished, I remember the like week after it was like it dropped at the Jam Cafe launch almost. I'd already pinned down like a title for a next book, which was Stay. And at that point, it was kind of very early, but I had ideas. And I'd argue that you could say I'd been kind of from that point working on this Elsewhere from then. You know, I knew there was another thing. But yeah, I feel the living has changed everything. I mean, you know, I think if I look at from 2016 to now, the sheer amount of things that have changed in my life that I've experienced, that I've learned, that I've understood, that I've been challenged on, you know, the great decisions and brave decisions I've made, the poor decisions, the way the world is like compared to then, and also what I care about now and what I think matters enough to explore, has completely influenced this. So this is again the kind of thing that would not have been possible to write before or during Boy.
Can I hear another poem?
Yes, I guess that is part of the deal. I'll do my newsreader shuffle. This just in, get coffee. That's the name of the poem, but it would work in a headline, wouldn't it? Okay, cool. Get coffee. Get coffee, miss everyone. Dream. Gender, suddenly instinctive as nodding at a passing Slipknot hoodie. The sun in your eyes, a lie when somewhere bombs happen. Empty fridges, empty youth clubs, empty parks, empty dating profiles, empty notebook of someone with raps to stay alive for tossed a hair straightener instead of a mic. 87 delayed due to a driver pulling over and weeping softly into a steering wheel over the shunned losers of reality shows. Light drizzle of strings, dazzle an otherwise so-so slam poem. Dream. Turns out death is just a different room.
Oh, Jim, my driver, my bus driver is my favourite line in there.
I write about buses a lot, don't I? It's so weird. They come in. Ode to bus drivers, doing your work, doing your work.
Yeah, yeah. Now so more so than ever before. So you've been living and gathering and writing and working. When did you go, right, it's time, this book's going to happen now?
Well, yeah, because the thing is, it doesn't feel like I've even done that. I mean, I obviously have by saying there's a title, there's a thing working on, whatever. But strangely, it still feels so early. It's so strange to say, isn't it? Because you know, 5 years is a long time for anything to happen. But it still feels early, but not in a negative, oh God, I have got so much work to do way. I think the thing is, Anne, genuinely, I'm not saying that I didn't enjoy Boy as a process. But I think by nature of the theme and where things were at that point, it wasn't an easy book to write at times. You know, it wasn't like I'm flying into the page every day and there's so many interesting possibilities and kind of scraps of thoughts coming in. It was quite a churned out like thing, beast, if you will, a true bad boy. So this though, I'm just enjoying it in a different way. Like I'm running a creative writing course, which I got in touch on before with you at the moment, an online email only one. And I'm really working hard on that course. And these are for beginning writers who have never written anything. And I'm really working hard on a lot of the journey that I'm doing with them is to kind of transform that thing of trepidation and fear of the blank page, like, you know, snarling at you when you turn up with like your mate, you know, your perfect idea, your great novel. And then the page is like, whatever, you know, I'm busy. I'm just trying to get this enjoyment and excitement about like what's the potential of a blank page, right? Now, that's not to say there's some naive part of me that's like, oh yeah, writing is never difficult. Obviously, a lot needs to happen for it to happen. But this whole process, though I can't say it feels like it's near to being finished, I am really enjoying it and I'm really wanting to rush to the page to keep working on it. And that's the difference at the moment. It feels like it's not necessarily I've sat down and said it's a thing that needs to be done by this date, but I know I'm committed to it, and I know that I will pursue it until it feels like, yeah, now is the time to, step back and let it sing.
And you've said it now out loud in front of me.
Recorded.
So,
Yeah.
And it's recorded. So
yeah.
That's it now.
That's it. It's all over.
Show us your poems, Jim.
I'll get like a stampede of random, folk coming outside, throwing like scraps of breadcrumbs at me or something weird to get my poems going. But, I've said it.
How you mentioned there the online teaching, and I know you've worked in schools and worked on projects in schools.
Yeah.
Young writers groups. So how important is teaching as part of your process?
Everything. It is huge to me. I've said this before. I think especially like in interviews for things, like I genuinely, and in not a kind of self-deprecating way, the work I do with other people around writing feels more like if the legacy of that is the thing that's remembered more than the poems themselves, that's good. That's cool with me. I get so much from it. I'm very much the kind of educator that like leans into what I can learn from an individual or a group of people, and then obviously offers my own experience and my own kind of, a lot of it for me about teaching and like interacting with creative writing, and it's just kind of trying to get that energy and that sense of possibility. I keep using this word today. There's so much against someone who's starting to write. I think it's very instinctive to have a kind of, it's not going to be good enough. I've not got a certain academic level of teaching. I've not done this, not done that. Forget it. Just like, that's what I'm interested in, like that anyone can genuinely try and start something. And yeah, okay, it might end up being one single poem scribbled in an after school session. No one sees it. They never come back. But even in that 3-minute moment, there might be some kind of form of a change there. So it's hugely important, and I let it be hugely important to my own process. Lots of the poems in this new book, because of course Boy didn't necessarily have the right room for that teaching side of things to be kind of in there. This references a lot, actually. There's a poem in it, I've not finished it yet, but it's called Heaven This, and it's about like finding an old pamphlet stapled together by a student that's been discarded, and how to me actually it completely centers 12 more poems from my own, because I've just read it, and it's filling it with the belief it deserves. So it's hugely important to me, and I'm just very fortunate to be able to have kept my toe in those waters throughout the pandemic, to always have had something, so that it's, because I know, and you may have felt this, the things that can be taken from the last year and like we've lost in a way, those connections being in rooms is big, but there's still been things to keep me motivated, I guess.
And where do you go to learn?
I think, great question. I think for a long time, and you know this about me, I've not necessarily been someone who has craved a writing space to share my work, to meet up with writers. Now that's not negative. It's just, I think at this point, everything still feels so new. There will be a point where I'll need that. So to be honest with you, I go to like reading, I go to watching and listening to all kinds of work. I go to being with friends, even virtually, being with people virtually, that isn't necessarily like we are a poetry discussion group. It's just, poems to me are very much conducive just to my life. It's not like a set thing. I don't have to just go to one place to talk about poems or get that. I'm learning from every single thing ever, and it's all coming into the work, and I genuinely mean that. It's not some kind of cliche like even the lamp above me is worth writing about. Like I do feed it off everything. And so for learning, daily experience, daily kind of thoughts, observations, and as I say, being fortunate enough that I'm always in touch in some way with other, often younger and new coming writers, and they're the people that, to be real with you, Anne, I've learned more from them than maybe you kind of publish, like people you might assume to have learned more from. That's just the truth.
No, I'm two things out of that. Yes, I completely agree, and that's not to say when you are in the presence of published poets and great educators, it's fantastic. But some of the students in schools come out with something on a regular basis that makes me go boom.
Absolutely.
That's it. That's exactly it. And the other thing is, the lamp above your head is worth writing about, because before you turned the light on, it was like some malevolent creature coming in from the ceiling, and now it's looking like we were saying earlier, like I don't know, a halo that's you're not quite in it yet. You're not quite in it yet.
Cheers, Anne. That might be like a kind of a B-side to the next collection, like a small, like 4-line thing. That I've got to touch on what you said though. Genuinely, and I have to admit, it's weird. Of all the things I'm missing, in terms of teaching, it is being in a room with students, particularly when you go in for the first time. You see, people disagree with this sometimes. They think it's the most terrifying part, but for me, my favorite moments are always when you go into a session and you almost are faced with, like, let's say 15 to 20, however many, whatever year of school they are, and you know a lot of them are already completely, like, internally arms folded, like, what have you got to offer? I completely love that. And that's not to say I'm going in there trying to assume I'm going to do any difference to them, but this is just so exciting to, poetry can be completely shut down way too early, and it can be, all the doors can be completely locked before you're even out of school, and that absolutely breaks my heart. But if you get there at the right moment and you just find a little way to, like, whack open a door, it can completely blow everything else apart. And I think that's why so many students come out with these amazing lines, because they're not even thinking like, I'm writing a poem. They're just talking. They're just, like, using the vernacular of now, and that's coming into the collection a lot, references to that, and kind of, you can literally use anything that is important to your life to be put into a poem, a tweet, a image. There's no rules. You don't have to, like, just write a certain way. So yeah, completely. And my favorite lines ever are often still by, like, a random in a workshop statement. I'm like, this is a poem title, get it down.
yeah, absolutely. You said something again that sparked off another train of thought, which was the B-side. Music. Jim Hall and music.
Yes, let's go.
Talk to me about music.
Talk to you about music.
In all the time.
Every time, yeah. It's absolutely the same for this. I mean, I think it's already come in a couple of pieces I've read today. Yeah, I mean, again, it's like, let in what you need to let in. I mean, I remember reading something about someone saying, and again, it's not a right or wrong. It's like everyone's got their own opinions. Saying something like, I think our good friend Neil Pike, I think someone said to him, Neil, you write about music a lot. Like, what else have you got? And it's like, well, actually, no, because music, if it's important, you don't have to write about it explicitly. A lot of stuff will just come in naturally. Like, obviously you can write about it in different ways, but yeah, if music is such a part of my life, and it is, I mean, brief history, when I was 20, did a lot of music journalism, traveled Europe to see, like, literally, I remember going to Denmark for literally one day. Like, I traveled, went to see a gig, came back in the early hours of the morning, completely worth it. It is, and again, maybe my dad being a music teacher and it being a big part of his life, the legacy again. Of course, it's going to come into my work, because also a thing about my process, we were talking about it before, genuine fact, I've never not, every poem I've written has been with music involved. I've always been listening to music. I've never written a single thing without having my earphones or my headphones in, because I feel like it taps me into just so much possibility. Again, I hate using the same word a lot, but it's really working today. Just, I need to have a way to latch on to something a bit more than just staring at a piece of paper, and music is often the kind of gateway in.
Yeah, I feel like you often in conversations there's a soundtrack. It's like, and the soundtrack is, and in I think one of the poems you've just done, or was it in the conversation before, where you said with the with the beat of whoever it was you said. So yeah, it makes me smile, because sometimes I know the soundtrack and sometimes I don't. So I put my own one in, or I'll peel off and go Googling and oh, okay.
Can we talk about this, Anne? Because I really want to mention this. This idea of, because I think I've been really conscious of this. And again, I absolutely am fine if someone says that they don't, let's be honest, they either don't really get much from it in my work, or they either just, like, skip it, as it were, almost like it is a track, actually, you just skip it. But this thing about people saying that you can't always be specific and, like, reference an artist or reference. Now, obviously, there's a way you can go about that. I think if you stack a poem full of just the same very unique, specific niche artists or places, yeah, you can lose a bit of the meaning. But if it's part of, there is Google, there is ways to find out. And again, if you're really being naive and think people want to read your book more than once, you can, the end of this book is going to have a section called Google's Your Friend, But So Am I. And I'm going to help by putting, like, some of the references and just explaining what they are, not in a generic way. Because then it's like, actually, if you're really serious about it as a reader, now I've done this with poetry collections and books, I'm like, I don't know what that is. That sounds kind of intriguing, it's obviously important. I will research it, and it kind of can add a different value, So I think, just wanted to touch on that, because this idea of you know, maybe not knowing what every single thing is in a poem can obviously be derailing, but it isn't always a negative. You know, it can open up different avenues, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's an editing thing, even, you know, at the level of editing for a book, but also we're talking about working with students as well, where some of the stuff they come out with, and I think, and I'll say, no, leave it in, because how can you translate that?
Yes.
That it's for me to understand what that means. And specificity is something you do particularly well, I think, because it isn't just about littering specifics through a piece of writing at all. But I think that ties into what I meant about finding out what's in Jim's head, because there's no point you saying, oh, soundtrack of the song we always used to play at school at the end of term. You've got to say what the track is, and then I will insert my own one there. So once I realise what it is, or usually I know what it is because of the context you put it in, and you are a real artist at doing that. You do it spectacularly well, and I think that's what makes me feel I know you when I'm reading your poems. I love it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's this thing, isn't there, about the specifics, and like I know it's a bit of a, well, not to everyone, but I see it as a very familiar quote, you know, in terms of process, that sometimes, you know, almost ironically, the more specific you are, the more you zoom in, and it seems so personal that no one would ever understand it. Often that's what makes it more universal, because as you said, you can read it and anyone can read it, and they might insert a different artist, different like, you know, let's say, you know, I do this a lot, like a fast food space. Someone might put their own hangout that they would have had that experience with. And as you say, I think the key for me is when, it's always about when to do it and when not, or when to pull back, especially in a poem where, you know, if you have line after line and there's no variety, and there's like, you know, there are times where, this is what I find really interesting, you know, I've worked on this really hard, like in the next piece I'll read, actually, there's like some lines that are super specific, and then deliberately there's the line after is a bit more, and I'm not going to use the word vague, but for example, like I use the word trees rather than a specific tree, because it opens up a bit more possibility. And last thing on that is, I remember listening to, like, this is a weird one, there's a YouTube channel which is looking at behavioral body language psychology, and they were talking about how if someone refers to like the idea of you rather than I or something like that, by saying you, it automatically like allows more possibility and more ways for the reader or the speaker, whatever, to take it, because it's like addressing a you. There's no like, you know, gender or I. It's like very focused in. But if it's like you can take that anywhere. And I think that's another thing about when to use that and when not. And so, you know, all these little intricacies. And as you know, with me, this is why I love poetry. You know, I actually find this exciting. Some people might find it exhausting, and like, I just want to talk about myself. I don't care about that. I'm not interested in Jim as I am this, I am this. It's like, how do you share your experience in a really engaging, exciting way for the reader?
So, poem, you said
poem.
in this next poem, actually.
In this next poem, yeah. Cool. All right. I'll do a coffee swig.
Yeah, definitely.
It's gone cold. That's the sign of a good conversation.
It
there
is.
You go.
I'm
cold coffee.
There
we go. So yeah, I don't think we've had a single sip. Okay, cool. Dark times, yes. Dark times, yes. Also, this burger so good you forget to text back. Unwritten frill of the hood thrown up seconds before rain. Your heart, though possibly broken, is so big will get bigger. It's okay to kiss a phone charger goodnight. Oh, forgiving whir of microwave. Even trees give up. As a book opens you, as a gaming chair's faithful shoulders. DJ says 3 shots. Nobody ducks. Bliss.
Beautifully done. Beautifully done. My favourite line being a heart. Yes, your heart is broken, but it's swollen.
Close enough, and I'll give you that one. Your heart, though possibly broken, is so big will get bigger.
Ah, nice.
See, can we hone in on that? You see, that's interesting to me because, like, you know, that can seem, some lines can seem really almost simple. I'm always really interested in veering on the edge of, like, you can almost feel a cliche coming, but you just like snap it at its like knees, and it's that real carefulness, you
Snapping your
know.
cliches at their knees. That's
Well, you
what.
know, you got to be, it depends on what you're looking for. And again, I've genuinely, this is the beauty of it all, isn't it? People might disagree. I've heard people read poems that have got like maybe one cliche and that still is, the whole thing is not affected by it. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't damage it, like it's a house. Yeah, but that's what I'm interested in. Like that subtle, simple, direct line balanced with a slightly more complex kind of emotion to it. So yeah, anyway, like I say, there you go.
So your poems, Jim, you work and work and work and work at them. How do you know when to stop?
Well, yes, nicely said. I think I have changed on that. I think I've become less pressured and sensitive about a poem clearly ending, if that makes sense. Like I'm more interested now in like particularly last lines is something I've been really conscious of. Like a last line. I read a great quote that a last line in a poem should always be an open door, not a closed door. And by that, it's like, you know, not to sort of pressure yourself to wrap it all up in a neat bow, or to kind of have a period of a closing. This is a clear ending to the poem, like, you know, almost to say, you know, if you imagine like a party, not that I ever go to them ever, but you know, when things are wrapping up and you're kind of like, okay, you know, party's over, off you go. You know, there are so many different ways to say goodbye, right? Like there's so many different ways you can do that. And I think in poems, the last lines are something I've worked hard on, because when I've got a last line that feels like a way out of the poem, that is interesting, that still kind of ties it up, but not too tight, then I'm happy now. Whereas I used to, as you probably know, with Boy especially, I was always like, right, how can I, you know, I think a lot of writers are doing this, and I'm the same. You almost want to like have a, how can I end this with an exact clear, and then they were all deeply sad, or, and then this happened and it was all this thing. That, I'll be honest with you, Anne, that's not how I think life often is, ever. And even if you're like with the most happy person ever in a relationship, even if you're in a home that's stable, as we know, maybe the pandemic is another example, everything can change in like a second. And I like a poem that ends like that, where you think something has changed and it can never be the same again. So it's an ongoing thing. I have to really be sure that the last line is something that feels good. And then I'll be honest with you, Anne, I'm more able now just to put the poem away, move on to the next one. The more I dwell on it, the more I want to unpick it, I want to tweak it. And actually that can never, ever end, right? Never.
No. And do you write it in your head before you get to write it on the page or the laptop or whatever? Are all those, oh, I'm going to put a cliche here and then I'm going to break its knees, kick its knees out from under it with this?
Sorry, cliches. If anyone out there that like is like housing cliches and like is like petting them right now, I don't hate them, but you know, there's a time and a never place. So, you know, I never ever do that. Everything, I start and I go where it goes. You know me, I am the biggest advocate ever of the free write, ever. All of the poems start with a free write, you know, where I allow anything and everything. What can belong can be decided later. You know, the Frank Gaspar poet has this great idea of the long arm poem. So rather than like you say, having this must be this line, this must be a cliche, you just let everything in, you know, you let the arm widen out, bring it all in, gather it in, and then you revise and see, you know, what can stay and what, hate to say it, what has to be kicked out into the shed. Not your shed, Anne, you know, you need to, you deserve better things than rejected lines. But you know, it's kind of like, yeah, I think it's never ever very methodical, which is interesting because a lot of people assume my writing is deeply methodical because of how I think a lot. But you know, I come up with 12 lines every 5 seconds. I mean, even doing this interview, I've thought of 7 images because of the background. You've got the dead flowers near the. Oh, should I voice that? Maybe I should pretend that it's cool. Yeah. You know, there's lots always in my head. So in a way that makes sense, right? That on the page, it's let everything in, and then as you say, the work for me, the free writing and the generating is never work, ever. It's never work. The work is the, as you've mentioned, thinking it's finished, thinking it's as good as I think it can be, moving on to the next one. That's the work for me.
Cool. I honestly, this isn't a cliche. I could talk for hours and hours.
Yeah, we've been talking a while,
I'm
probably, haven't we?
looking at
Yeah.
the clock and thinking,
God, yeah.
we're clattering along. Is there another one just in for us?
that, that wasn't deliberate, but yeah, technically there is the last poem, yes, but the way I did that wasn't meant to be like kind of, it's like, you know, like when someone's gonna really passively aggressively get your attention, like hello poems. All right, okay,
You do
cool.
too many Zoom meetings.
Yeah, way too many. Ode to Zoom, not. Okay, cool. Stay vibrant. Not clothes, not internet presence, come on. So what if your neck tattoo means serenity? Elsewhere, poor brains of a PS5 smashed to bits for such brief clout. A neighbor checks their car's still breathing. Everything is so everything. If there is a place to put pain, where?
A neighbor checks their car is still breathing.
That was based on genuinely, so my view is like directly opposite onto the kind of front end of the car, and this neighbor's car alarm always goes off at random hours of night. And the way it's the observation, isn't it? Like obviously he's just running, he runs outside, he turns off the alarm, but you know that the position he always pulls is like he's like leaning into it, and it's literally like he's checking for a pulse, you know.
Excellent. Excellent, like checking the baby in the cot.
Yeah, well, yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Jim, it's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'll be sort of dropping you the odd text to say, oh, how's the book?
They could just lost your
How's the book
connection. Can you
coming?"
imagine that? We've got like a frozen Anne. Because you're still there now. That was amazing. You know what happened? This is so funny, Anne. This is the perfect way to end. You went, Jim, it's been amazing. Thank you so much. And then everything froze. It was like, that's it. There's no chance for me to even say thank you to you. But Anne, thank you so much. It's flown by. As I said to you before we hit record, and there's a lot of people that know me will know, I haven't been doing much like outwardly with my own work. So thank you genuinely for quickly get it in there, for the space you give me every time to talk about my own work, and also just the amazing impact you've had on me as a writer and a human with doing Big White Shed and putting Boy out. And you know, you're the kind of person that always has my back, literally or metaphorically. So thank you for that.
Oh no, thank you, Jim. It's sort of two-way street. It really is. So yeah, thank you, and I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you. Bye.